The great council hall buzzed with excited voices as alien beings from 47 different worlds filled the massive chamber. Jake Harrison stood quietly at the human table, his weathered face showing no emotion as he watched the other delegates whisper among themselves. The air felt thick with tension and something else that made his stomach turn, the smell of fear mixed with eager anticipation. Council Prime Zethkree clicked his bug-like jaws together as he called for silence. The insect leader's forearms gestured, dramatically while his compound eyes fixed on the human delegation. Behind him, a holographic display showed images of human ships and space stations scattered across the galaxy. "We gather today to address a growing threat to galactic peace," Zethkree announced, his voice echoing through the chamber's crystal walls. "The Terran Federation has been building military forces beyond any reasonable need for defense. They refuse to share their advanced technologies with the Council. They act without permission and ignore our authority." Jake felt Captain Lisa Morgan tense beside him. The military officer's hand moved slightly toward her communication device, but Jake gave her a small shake of his head. "Not yet." Dr. Peter Kane leaned forward at the table, his scientific mind already calculating the implications of what they were hearing. Commander Helen Brooks sat perfectly still, her years of military training keeping her expression neutral even as anger burned in her eyes. "The humans have developed shield systems that make their ships nearly impossible to destroy," continued Zethkree, his mandibles clicking faster now. "They have weapons that can tear holes in space itself. They have machines that can change the very air on dead worlds to make them livable, yet they keep all of this knowledge to themselves." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled aliens. The Delvian representative nodded his scaled head vigorously. The crystalline beings from Altair Prime hummed in harmony with each other, their way of showing support. Even the normally quiet Centaurans shifted in their seats with obvious discomfort. Jake knew what was coming next. 20 years of diplomatic service had taught him to read the signs. This was not a discussion or a negotiation. This was a trial, and humanity had already been found guilty. "Therefore," Zethkree announced with obvious satisfaction, "the Galactic Council demands the following from the Terran Federation. All human military vessels above Class 2 specifications must be immediately disarmed. All advanced defensive technologies must be transferred to Council oversight. All research into gravitational manipulation, quantum tunneling, and dimensional engineering must be shared with Council scientists." The chamber erupted in cheers and applause from dozens of alien throats, tentacles, and other vocal organs. Some delegates stood and waved their appendages in celebration. Others made sounds that Jake's translator interpreted as expressions of joy and relief. Jake slowly rose to his feet, the scraping of his chair against the floor somehow audible despite the noise. The celebration died down as all eyes turned to him. He was not a tall man by human standards, but something in his posture made him seem to tower over the assembled delegates. "And if we refuse these demands?" Jake asked, his voice calm and steady. Zethkree's mandibles spread in what passed for a smile among his kind. "Then humanity will be declared a rogue species. Economic sanctions will be imposed. Human ships will be banned from Council space. Human colonies will be isolated. And if necessary, military action will be taken to protect the galaxy from the human threat." Jake looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes or eye equivalents of delegates who had once called themselves friends of humanity. He saw excitement in their faces, anticipation of finally putting the troublesome humans in their place. They had no idea what they were asking for. Lisa Morgan touched her wrist device, sending a coded signal to the human fleet waiting beyond the system's edge. Helen Brooks activated her tablet, pulling up security protocols that had been prepared for exactly this situation. Peter Kane began entering commands into his scientific equipment, downloading critical data from the Council's own databases. The other delegates watched these preparations with growing confusion. They had expected anger, protests, desperate negotiations. Instead, the humans seemed to be organizing. The Terran Federation requests time to consider your ultimatum, Jake said finally. You have 6 standard hours, Zethkri replied, clearly enjoying the moment. After that, we will require your immediate answer. Jake nodded once, then turned to his delegation. Ladies and gentlemen, we're leaving. As the 4 humans gathered their materials and walked toward the exit, the alien delegates began talking excitedly among themselves. They had done it. They had finally cornered the most dangerous species in known space and forced them to choose between submission and destruction. None of them noticed the slight smile that crossed Jake Harrison's face as he reached the chamber doors. None of them wondered why the humans seemed so calm in the face of such overwhelming odds. None of them asked themselves what humanity might do when backed into a corner. They would learn soon enough. The humans had a saying about cornered animals, that the aliens were about to understand firsthand, and when they did, they would discover that there were fates worse than war. Sometimes the most terrible response to a threat was not violence at all, but something far more devastating. The simple act of walking away. The human quarters on the council station felt cramped and hostile now, though nothing had physically changed. Jake Harrison stood before a holographic display showing the positions of human ships throughout the galaxy, while his team worked quietly around him. The weight of decision pressed down on all of them like the atmosphere of a heavy world. Lisa Morgan finished her secure communication with Admiral Scott Peterson and turned to face the group. Her military bearing remained perfect, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. Admiral Peterson confirms that Council species are already moving military assets toward our trade routes, she reported. They're not waiting for our answer. Peter Kane looked up from his data tablet, his scientist's mind racing through calculations and possibilities. The intelligence we've gathered over the past 6 months is conclusive, he said quietly. The Thai Zephyrian Empire has been feeding our defensive capabilities to the Council. They want our shield technology so they can use it to control the Outer Rim colonies. Helen Brooks activated another display showing troop movements across 3 sectors. The Kralix hegemony has positioned 7 battle groups along our shipping lanes. They're calling it peacekeeping exercises, but the formations are clearly designed for interdiction. Jake rubbed his tired eyes and walked to the small window that looked out onto the massive space station. Thousands of alien beings lived and worked here, representatives of species that spanned half the galaxy. For decades, this place had symbolized cooperation and peace. Now it felt like a trap closing around humanity. His personal communicator chimed with an encrypted message from Earth. The transmission took several minutes to decode, but when it finished, Jake's expression grew even more serious. The message was short and to the point. Earth's government had already made their decision about the Council's ultimatum. Show me the projection analysis, Jake said, turning back to his team. Peter activated a new hologram that filled the center of the room with swirling data streams and probability charts. If we comply with their demands, we'll be defenseless within 18 months, he explained. Our colonies will be absorbed into Council territory. Our people will be relocated or enslaved. Earth itself will become a protectorate under alien control. Our defensive systems aren't just about military protection, added Helen. They're integrated into our life support, our terraforming, our transportation networks. Disabling them would cripple our entire civilization. Lisa pulled up another display showing human assets across the galaxy. We have merchant fleets in 43 systems, research stations in 27, mining operations in 61, and defensive platforms in over 100 locations. If we withdraw everything... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood the implications. Jake's communicator buzzed again. This time, the call came directly from Admiral Peterson, his voice tight with controlled anger. Mr. Ambassador, our long-range sensors are detecting massive fleet movements. The Council isn't planning to negotiate. They're planning to take what they want by force. Admiral, what's the status of Protocol 7? Jake asked. All preparations are complete, sir. Every human ship and station has received the coded instructions. We're ready to implement on your order." Jake closed his eyes for a moment, thinking about the implications of what they were about to do. Protocol 7 had been developed years ago as a contingency plan, but none of them had ever expected to use it. It was designed for exactly this situation, when humanity faced the choice between slavery and freedom. "Sir," Peter said softly, "there's something else you need to know. The Council's own databases show how dependent they've become on human technology. Our atmospheric processors maintain breathable air on 37 worlds. Our fusion reactors power the infrastructure of 12 major trade hubs. Our medical systems keep alive millions of beings whose biology we've learned to treat better than their own doctors. They don't realize how much they need us," Lisa added. "They think they can just take our technology and figure out how to use it themselves." Helen shook her head grimly. "They've never had to build anything from scratch. For the past 50 years, whenever they had a problem, they came to us to solve it. They've forgotten how to be self-sufficient." Jake opened his eyes and looked at each member of his team. These were good people who had dedicated their lives to building bridges between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. Now, they were being forced to burn those bridges down. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said quietly, "contact Admiral Peterson. Tell him to implement Protocol 7 immediately. All human assets are to return to Federation space within 72 hours. "Sir," Lisa asked, "what about the civilian populations? On mixed colonies? Every human citizen gets evacuation priority. Anyone who wants to leave with us is welcome. Anyone who wants to stay—" Jake paused, knowing that some humans had built lives among alien communities. "Anyone who wants to stay can make that choice, but they'll be on their own." Helen started typing commands into her tablet, activating communication networks that would carry the withdrawal order to every human presence in the galaxy. "Sir, the economic impact alone will be catastrophic for them. Human shipping handles 60% of intersector cargo transport." "That's their problem now," Jake replied with finality. Peter looked at the data one more time, running final calculations in his head. "Jake, you realize that once we leave, we can never come back. They'll try to reverse engineer our technology, and when that fails, they'll blame us for their problems." "I'm counting on it," Jake said. "The galaxy is about to learn a hard lesson about the difference between dependence and cooperation." As his team began implementing the most significant withdrawal in galactic history, Jake returned to the window. Outside, alien ships continued their normal routines, unaware that the foundation of their civilization was about to be pulled out from under them. Humanity had tried cooperation and been met with threats. They had offered partnership and been answered with demands for submission. Now they would give the galaxy exactly what it seemed to want: a universe without human interference. The aliens would get their wish, but they would discover that some wishes came with prices too terrible to pay. The first reports began arriving before dawn on the Council station, filtered through official channels that carried routine shipping updates and trade notifications. What started as minor anomalies in the overnight reports quickly became a flood of information that left even experienced administrators struggling to understand what they were seeing. Council Intelligence Director Vextar burst into Prime Zethkri's private chambers without the usual ceremonial announcements. His tentacles writhed with agitation as he activated a portable holographic display that filled the room with swirling data streams. "Prime, we have a situation," Vextar announced, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "The humans are leaving." Zethkri's compound eyes focused on the display, his mandibles clicking with confusion. "Leaving the station? Good. That saves us the trouble of escorting them out after they refuse our reasonable demands." "No, Prime. You don't understand." Vextar's tentacles pointed to specific data points on the hologram. "They're leaving everything. Every human ship, every human facility, every human presence anywhere in Council space. They're all powering down and departing. Across the station, similar scenes of confusion and growing alarm played out in offices and chambers throughout the massive structure. Trade Commissioner Kilneth watched her displays with mounting horror as shipping schedules dissolved into chaos. Cargo vessels worth trillions of credits were simply abandoning their routes mid-journey. "They're not even completing their deliveries," she whispered to her assistant, a young Delvian whose scales had turned pale with stress. "The dilithium shipment to Centauri Prime alone is worth more than most planetary budgets." On the mining world of Kepler 438b, human foreman Gary Tucker supervised the methodical evacuation of the largest rare Earth operation outside of Federation space. His crews moved with military precision, gathering personal belongings while leaving behind decades of infrastructure development. "Sir, the Altarian supervisors are demanding an explanation," reported mining engineer Kelly Adams, her voice strained with the emotional weight of abandoning 40 years of work. "They're saying we can't just walk away from contractual obligations." Gary sealed another storage container and marked it for transport. "Tell them our contract was with the Galactic Council, and the Council has decided they don't want us here anymore." "But, sir, we've invested 4 decades building this operation. The extraction equipment alone represents billions of credits in development costs." "And we're leaving every bit of it behind," Gary replied firmly. "Our orders are clear, personal, belongings only. Everything else stays." The same scene repeated itself on dozens of worlds across the galaxy. Human teachers walked away from universities they had helped establish, leaving behind alien students who had never learned from anyone else. Human doctors abandoned hospitals they had built, taking with them medical knowledge that no other species possessed. Human engineers sealed construction sites where massive projects sat half-completed, their alien contractors suddenly facing technological challenges they couldn't solve. Captain Julia Santos stood on the bridge of her cargo vessel New Horizon, watching her crew complete the final shutdown procedures for a space station they had been constructing for the Delvian Republic. The project was 80% complete, representing 3 years of continuous work and innovation. "Captain, the Delvian project manager is on communication channel 7, her officer reported. "He's begging us to reconsider. They're offering to triple our contract payments." Julia shook her head without turning away from the viewport. "Tell them we appreciate their previous business relationship, but humanity's involvement in this project is concluded." "Ma'am, what about the technical specifications? They don't know how to complete the construction without our engineering databases." "That's no longer our concern." Back on the council station, Jake Harrison prepared for what he knew would be his final appearance before the assembled delegates. As he walked through corridors that suddenly felt alien and hostile, confused representatives from dozens of species tried to stop him for explanations. The Altarian trade representative grabbed Peter Kane's arm as the human scientist passed by. "You can't just abandon your commitments. Our entire agricultural system depends on your atmospheric processing technology." Peter gently but firmly removed the alien's grip from his sleeve. "Then perhaps your species should have considered that before threatening to dismantle our civilization. But we didn't mean the civilian operations. We were only talking about military restrictions." "Were you?" Peter asked quietly. "Because your council demanded the transfer of all our advanced technologies, including the atmospheric processors, shield generators, and terraforming systems that keep your worlds habitable." Similar confrontations occurred throughout the station as the scope of humanity's response became clear. Alien officials who had spent the previous day celebrating their victory over the troublesome humans now found themselves facing the loss of technologies and services they had taken for granted. Dr. Nexvi, the Council's chief scientific advisor, rushed between emergency meetings as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire's advanced manufacturing centers were shutting down as human-designed quantum fabricators went offline. The Kralix hegemony's military communications were failing as quantum relay networks maintained by human technicians began experiencing cascade failures. How could we not have realized? HFY muttered to himself as he reviewed the data. They integrated themselves into everything. When the human delegation entered the council chambers for what everyone now realized would be the last time, the sight that greeted them was barely controlled chaos. Empty seats, where human advisors had sat for decades, silent communication consoles that had buzzed with human input, and a growing awareness among the alien delegates that they had made a catastrophic miscalculation. "Order! We will have order!" Zethkri's voice cracked as he tried to regain control of the session. "Ambassador Harrison, explain your species' actions." Jake stood at the human table, looking around the chamber with the same calm expression he had worn the day before. "There's nothing to explain, Prime Zethkri. The Galactic Council demanded humanity's disarmament and the transfer of our technologies to Council control. We have respectfully declined." "You can't just leave. You have obligations, responsibilities." "To whom?" Jake asked simply. "You made it very clear yesterday that humanity is considered a threat to galactic peace. We're simply removing that threat by removing ourselves. But the consequences are yours to deal with," Jake interrupted. "You made your choice. We've made ours." As the human delegation filed out of the chamber for the final time, they left behind 47 species that were only beginning to understand what they had lost. The galaxy was about to discover the difference between cooperation born from mutual respect and dependence born from technological laziness, and humanity was going home. 3 weeks after humanity's departure, the first major system failures began cascading across the galaxy, like dominoes falling in slow motion. What had started as minor inconveniences and temporary disruptions was rapidly becoming a crisis that threatened the foundation of interstellar civilization. On the agricultural world of New Ceres, Governor Felmoth stood in his command center watching real-time displays that showed dying crop fields stretching beyond the horizon. The massive atmospheric processors that maintained the delicate balance of gases necessary for non-native species cultivation had begun failing without human maintenance crews. "Governor, the technical teams from 3 different species have attempted to restart the primary atmospheric regulation system," his agricultural minister reported, exhaustion clear in his voice. "None of them understand the quantum atmospheric manipulation technology well enough to prevent the cascade failure." Felmoth's scaled hands gripped the edge of his desk as another section of farmland turned red on the display. "How long until complete agricultural collapse?" 6 weeks, maybe 7 if we implement emergency rationing immediately. The atmospheric composition is shifting beyond the tolerance levels for our food crops. And our request for technical assistance from other council species? No one else understands how the human systems work, the minister said quietly. They built everything to integrate with their other technologies in ways that seemed simple, when they were here to maintain it. The same pattern was repeating itself across dozens of worlds. Industrial centers that had hummed with productivity for decades suddenly faced equipment failures that local technicians couldn't diagnose. Research stations lost decades of experimental data when human-designed quantum storage systems locked themselves down. Medical facilities watched helplessly as life support systems designed around human bioengineering principles began producing dangerous anomalies. Dr. HFY stood before an emergency council session, trying to explain the scope of the crisis to delegates who still couldn't grasp what was happening. The holographic displays behind him showed a galaxy-wide network of infrastructure, with red warning indicators spreading like an infection. "The humans didn't just trade with us or provide services," he explained, his voice heavy with the weight of realization. "They became the invisible foundation that held our modern civilization together." Prime Zethkri's mandibles clicked with increasing agitation. "Surely you're exaggerating the scope of the problem. We represent 47 advanced civilizations with thousands of years of technological development. Prime, let me show you the analysis." HFY activated a detailed breakdown of galactic infrastructure. Transportation networks that move goods between star systems, 68% were designed or upgraded by human engineers. Communication relays that allow instant messaging across the galaxy, 43% use human quantum entanglement technology. Power generation systems that supply energy to our major population centers, 51% incorporate human fusion reactor designs. The display continued to reveal layer after layer of human integration into alien society. Water purification, systems, waste management networks, environmental controls, manufacturing processes, all had been improved or entirely redesigned by human expertise over the past 50 years. Trade Commissioner Kilneth had even worse news to report. The economic collapse is accelerating beyond our worst projections. Without human cargo ships, we've lost 60% of our intersector shipping capacity. Without human financial networks, credit transfers that used to take minutes now require days or weeks. But surely other species can adapt their ships and systems to fill the gap, suggested the Delvian representative. That's exactly the problem, Kilneth replied grimly. Human technology was so efficient and reliable that most species never developed alternatives. Why build your own cargo ships when human vessels could carry twice the payload at half the cost? Why maintain your own communication networks when human quantum relays provided instant contact across the galaxy? Intelligence Director Vextar's report painted an even more disturbing picture. The Kralix hegemony attempted to seize control of the abandoned human mining operation in the Vega system yesterday. 3 of their destroyer-class vessels were completely disabled by some kind of automated defense system. What kind of defense system? Zethkri demanded. Unknown. The humans apparently installed security protocols before they left. Every attempt to access abandoned human facilities results in complete technological lockdown or active defensive responses that our best military engineers can't override or understand. Captain Ford Williams monitored these developments from his command ship positioned at the edge of human space. The security lockdown protocols had been his responsibility, implemented with surgical precision across thousands of human installations throughout the galaxy. Sir, sensors are detecting more attempts at forced entry into our abandoned facilities, his tactical officer reported. The Altarian Republic tried to break into the atmospheric processing station on Kepler 442c. The automated defenses disabled their entire engineering team's equipment. Williams nodded with grim satisfaction. Any casualties? No, sir. The systems are designed to disable, not destroy. The aliens were left stranded, but alive until rescue ships could reach them. Admiral Peterson's voice crackled through the secure communication channel. Captain, what's your assessment of their ability to reverse engineer our technology? Negligible, sir. Our systems were designed with quantum encryption and self-modifying code structures. Even if they could break through the security protocols, they lack the foundational knowledge to understand how the technology actually works. And their fleet movements? Still following standard patrol patterns within Council space. But their operational efficiency has dropped by approximately 40%. Navigation systems that relied on human quantum positioning networks are showing increasing error rates. Back in the council chambers, the debate had devolved into desperate finger-pointing, as the scope of their dependence became undeniable. Species that had eagerly supported the ultimatum to humanity now demanded explanations from council leadership. "You told us the humans were becoming too dangerous," shouted the Centauran representative, his crystalline form vibrating with anger. "You said their military buildup threatened galactic stability." "They were a threat," Zethkri insisted, though his conviction was wavering. Their refusal to share technology, their secretive research programs, their independent military development. "Technology that kept our worlds habitable," the Centauran shot back. "Research that solved problems we couldn't handle ourselves. Military protection that allowed us to focus on civilian development instead of defense." The Altarian delegate rose from his seat, his scaled features flushed with emotion. My homeworld has 3 major cities that depend entirely on human atmospheric processors. Without them, millions of my people will have to be evacuated within months. Then find other solutions, Zethkri snapped. We are advanced civilizations. We can solve these problems ourselves. With what? Asked the Delvian representative quietly. Over the past 5 decades, whenever we encountered a technological challenge, we asked the humans for help. They were so good at solving problems that we stopped trying to solve them ourselves. The uncomfortable truth was settling over the chamber like a suffocating blanket. Humanity hadn't conquered the galaxy through force or manipulation. They had simply been so competent, so innovative, and so willing to help that other species had gradually handed over responsibility for maintaining their own civilizations. As the arguments continued, none of the delegates noticed the quiet figure sitting in the observation gallery above the chamber floor. Jake Harrison had returned to the station, not as a diplomat, but as a witness to the consequences of the Council's choice. He said nothing, asked for nothing, and offered nothing. He simply watched as 47 species began to understand what they had lost when they decided that humanity's help was too dangerous to accept. 2 months after humanity's withdrawal, galactic civilization teetered on the edge of complete systemic collapse. Emergency council sessions had become daily occurrences as crisis reports flooded in from every sector of known space. The carefully maintained order that had defined interstellar society for centuries was unraveling faster than anyone had thought possible. Dr. Emma Foster stood on the observation deck of the human research vessel Horizon's Edge, positioned at the very edge of Federation space where they could monitor council communications without being detected. Her job was to document the collapse for historical records, though watching an entire galactic civilization destroy itself felt more like witnessing a massive natural disaster than conducting scientific research. Captain Rodriguez, are you receiving the emergency broadcasts from the Altarian system? She asked, watching the data streams scroll across her displays. Captain Linda Rodriguez nodded grimly from her position at the command console. Atmospheric processors on 4 major agricultural worlds have failed completely. They're estimating mass starvation within 6 weeks unless they can restore life support systems. Any response from other council species? The Zephyrian Empire offered to provide food shipments, but their own cargo fleet is operating at 20% capacity without human logistics networks. The Kralix hegemony promised technical assistance, but their engineers don't understand atmospheric manipulation technology any better than the Altarians do. The scope of the crisis had grown beyond anyone's worst projections. Manufacturing, centers that had produced goods for half the galaxy sat idle because their quantum fabrication systems required human-designed maintenance protocols that no other species could perform. Transportation networks that had connected hundreds of worlds for decades were failing as ships equipped with human navigation systems became lost in space without the quantum positioning beacons that human technicians had maintained. On the dying world of Epsilon Eridani III, Colonial Administrator Vector broadcast his final status report before planetary evacuation. His voice carried across council emergency frequencies with the hollow tone of someone who had watched everything he had built crumble around him. Critical life support systems have failed across 80% of the inhabited zones, he reported, to any ships that might still be listening. We estimate less than 10 days before complete atmospheric collapse makes the planet uninhabitable. We are requesting immediate emergency evacuation assistance from any vessels capable of long-range transport. The response was silence. Every species was dealing with their own infrastructure crises, and what remained of the Council's emergency fleet was scattered across the galaxy, trying to prevent the collapse of more critical systems with ships that barely functioned without human support technology. Director Nexvi had aged visibly during the crisis months, his once proud bearing reduced to the exhausted posture of someone who had spent weeks trying to hold back an avalanche with his bare hands. Standing before what remained of the council assembly, he delivered reports that grew more catastrophic with each passing day. The cascade failure has entered what our models call the terminal phase, he announced, his voice barely above a whisper. We're not just losing human technology. We're watching the collapse of integrated systems that no one realized depended on human innovation and maintenance. The holographic display behind him showed the galactic infrastructure network as a web of connections that had once pulsed with healthy green indicators. Now, vast sections glowed red with system failures or had gone completely dark. Entire star systems were becoming isolated as communication relays failed and transportation routes became impassable. Medical facilities are losing patients because treatment protocols developed through human medical research require equipment and knowledge that we can't maintain, HFY continued. Agricultural worlds face starvation because atmospheric processors need constant adjustment that only human atmospheric engineers understood. Even our basic power generation is failing because fusion reactor designs were optimized using human engineering principles that we never bothered to learn ourselves. Prime Zethkri's health had deteriorated along with his civilization. The stress of watching his carefully ordered galaxy descend into chaos had taken a visible toll on his aging body. His mandibles clicked weakly as he struggled to maintain some semblance of authority over the dying council. There must be something we can salvage from this situation, he insisted, though his voice lacked the commanding presence it had once carried. Send another delegation to the humans. Offer them substantial concessions, favorable trade agreements, territorial grants, whatever they want. We tried that approach 2 weeks ago, Intelligence Director Vexstar replied wearily. Ambassador Harrison listened to our offers with perfect diplomatic courtesy, thanked us for our time, and suggested that we use this period to reflect on the consequences of our choices. Then what do they want from us? Zethkri demanded, his voice cracking with desperation. Trade Commissioner Kilneth answered with the brutal honesty of someone who had nothing left to lose. Nothing. That's what we never understood about them. They don't want anything from us anymore. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore, even for the most stubborn council members. Humanity hadn't built dependencies into their technology as some kind of long-term strategy for control. They had simply been so competent and willing to help that other species had gradually stopped maintaining their own expertise. Why learn atmospheric engineering when human specialists could solve any problem? Why develop advanced manufacturing when human facilities could produce better results at lower costs? Captain Helen Brooks received daily intelligence reports from human observation posts throughout the galaxy, tracking the collapse with scientific precision. The data painted a picture of civilizational failure that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Admiral Peterson requests an update on military threats to Federation space, she reported to Jake Harrison during their daily briefing aboard the neutral station at Kepler's Gate. Jake shook his head as he reviewed the latest reports. They can't threaten us even if they wanted to. Half their battle fleets are grounded for maintenance they can't perform, and the other half are getting lost in space without human navigation systems. Dr. Peter Kane looked up from his analysis tablets, where he had been tracking the economic collapse in real time. The Centauran Confederation is offering to break away from the Council entirely if we'll restore just their atmospheric processing systems. They're willing to grant us sovereignty over 3 star systems in exchange. And our response? The same as always. We appreciate their offer, but humanity's withdrawal from galactic affairs is complete and permanent. As the months passed, the human observers documented increasingly desperate attempts by alien civilizations to solve problems they had forgotten how to handle themselves. They tried to reverse engineer abandoned human technology, resulting in catastrophic equipment failures that made their situations worse. They attempted to form new technological alliances to replace human expertise, only to discover that no other species possessed the broad base of knowledge that humanity had developed over centuries of innovation and exploration. Some began to Understand the uncomfortable truth that the human threat had never been military conquest or technological domination. The real threat had been humanity's competence itself, their ability to solve problems, improve systems, and make life better for everyone around them. When that competence was withdrawn, the galaxy discovered just how dependent they had become on the species they had tried to control. The silence from human space was deafening, broken only by occasional reports of new colonies being established. In distant galaxies and technological breakthroughs that made their previous achievements look primitive. Humanity was thriving in isolation, while the galaxy that had rejected them collapsed under the weight of its own technological helplessness. 1 year after humanity's departure, Jake Harrison stood alone in the empty council chambers where it had all begun. The great assembly hall that once hosted representatives from 47 thriving civilizations now echoed with the footsteps of a single human walking through the graveyard of galactic diplomacy. The massive chamber felt like a tomb. Dust had settled on the seats where alien delegates had once debated the future of interstellar civilization. The holographic displays that had shown the proud achievements of dozens of species now flickered with error messages or remained completely dark. Emergency lighting cast long shadows between the empty rows, creating an atmosphere of abandonment that seemed to seep into the walls themselves. Jake walked slowly through the aisles, reading the nameplate of each species that had participated in humanity's trial. Many of those nameplates now represented governments that no longer existed. The Altarian Republic had dissolved 6 months ago when their homeworld became uninhabitable. The Zephyrian Empire had fractured into 12 warring factions fighting over the remaining functional technology. The proud Centauran Confederation had been reduced to 3 isolated colonies struggling to maintain basic life support. His footsteps stopped at the elevated platform where Prime Zethkri had delivered humanity's ultimatum with such confidence and satisfaction. The insectoid leader had died 2 months ago when the medical facility treating his age-related illness lost power during a cascading grid failure. The doctors had frantically tried to contact human medical specialists, but their desperate messages had disappeared into the void of severed diplomatic channels. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through Jake's communicator, breaking the silence of the dead chamber. Mr. Ambassador, we're receiving a status update from Admiral Peterson. He's requesting your final assessment for the historical archives. Jake activated his recording device, his voice steady and professional despite the emotional weight of what he was documenting. The words he spoke would become part of humanity's official record of the galactic collapse, studied by future generations who would need to understand how an entire civilization could destroy itself through fear and arrogance. Personal log. Ambassador Jake Harrison, final diplomatic assessment of the Galactic Council dissolution. Today marks exactly 1 year since humanity's complete withdrawal from galactic affairs following the Council's ultimatum. He paused, looking around the chamber where 47 species had demanded humanity's submission and received instead a lesson in the consequences of their own choices. The Council's demands were based on a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature and human intentions. They observed our military capabilities and assumed we were preparing for conquest. They witnessed our technological advancement and concluded we sought domination over other species. They saw our willingness to help solve problems and interpreted it as manipulation designed to create dependence. Through the chamber's massive viewport, the space around the station was nearly empty, where hundreds of ships from dozens of species had once docked in a constant flow of diplomatic and commercial traffic. Now only a few desperate vessels remained. Their crews hoped against all evidence that someone, somewhere, might still have solutions to offer for problems that had grown beyond anyone's ability to solve. What the Council never understood, Jake continued, was that humanity had no interest in ruling the galaxy. We were content to trade freely, share knowledge openly, and help other species improve their lives. We built our civilization on the principles of cooperation and mutual benefit. His communicator buzzed with an incoming message from Dr. Kane. reporting from the Human Research Station at Proxima Centauri. "Sir, our deep space telescopes are detecting massive population movements in the former Council territories. We estimate over 50 billion refugees attempting to reach systems with remaining functional infrastructure." Jake acknowledged the report and returned to his historical log. The numbers were staggering, but they represented the inevitable result of a galactic civilization that had forgotten how to maintain itself. When faced with the choice between submission and independence, humanity chose independence. When confronted with demands to surrender our sovereignty in exchange for the privilege of solving other species' problems, we chose to walk away. Updates continued to flow in from across human space, painting a picture of a species that had not merely survived their isolation, but had thrived in ways that surprised even their own leaders. Dr. Kane reported breakthrough research in dimensional engineering that promised to revolutionize space travel. Commander Brooks confirmed successful tests of defensive systems that made their previous capabilities look primitive. Captain Santos had established the first human colony in the Andromeda Galaxy, marking humanity's expansion beyond the local group entirely. "The withdrawal has had unexpected benefits for human development," Jake noted in his log. "Freed from the constant demand to solve other species' problems, our scientists and engineers have focused on advancing human civilization. Our colonies are expanding at unprecedented rates. Our technology has advanced more in this single year than in the previous decade." He walked to the Great Seal of the Galactic Council embedded in the chamber floor, a symbol of unity that now represented only the failure of 47 species to understand the difference between partnership and control. The seal's surface was cracked and tarnished, much like the civilization it had once represented. Some have asked whether humanity feels responsible for the galactic collapse. The answer is simple. We feel responsible for humanity. When given the choice between subjugation and freedom, we chose freedom. When faced with demands to surrender our independence for the sake of galactic stability, we chose to preserve our sovereignty. Jake's final entry was interrupted by a proximity alert from his shuttle's automated systems. Long-range sensors had detected another desperate vessel approaching the station, broadcasting emergency signals on all frequencies. He listened to the transmission with the same professional detachment he had maintained throughout the collapse. "Please, if anyone can hear this message, we need immediate assistance. Our homeworld is dying. The atmospheric processors have failed and we don't know how to repair them. We'll give you anything. Our technology, our resources, our complete allegiance. We just need someone to show us how to fix what's broken." The message continued for several minutes, growing more desperate with each repeated plea. It was the same story Jake had heard hundreds of times over the past year. Another species discovering too late that they had traded self-sufficiency for temporary convenience. "We could have fought," Jake said, returning to his log. "We possessed the military capability to resist the Council's demands through force. We could have conquered the galaxy and ruled it through superior technology and overwhelming firepower. Instead, we chose the path of dignity. We simply left." He deactivated his recording device and began walking toward the chamber exit. His work here was complete, and humanity's chapter in galactic history was officially closed. As he reached the great doors that had once welcomed delegates from across known space, Jake paused for one final look at the empty hall. "We walked away in silence," he said quietly to the empty chamber, "and in that silence, you learned what you had lost." As Jake's shuttle departed the abandoned council station, the alien vessel continued broadcasting its desperate plea into the void. The message echoed through empty space, received by automated monitoring systems, but answered by no one. The galaxy had learned too late that there was a species among them that would rather live alone in freedom than together in chains. The humans had kept their word. They had walked away in silence, leaving the council to pay the price for their own choices. And in the vast emptiness between the stars, that silence spoke louder than any words ever could.